When I was 14 years old, I had a dream. A dream that nearly a decade later, I couldn't forget. I thought it was my destiny to be a professional wrestler on national TV. A decade later, I finally made it. Or so I thought. In less than a year, it was over.
Right, so you disappear, you're off television, you're done. What's the story?
And nobody knew why.
I think a lot of people have read on the internet that I've got hepatitis C, and everybody else thinks I've just got brain damage.
This is the story of my final tour. On the shows where I started, with the people I knew.
No, I can't wrestle anymore. Please feel sorry for me.
It was the last time I'd ever wrestle. The last chance to say goodbye. The last hope for a resolution. The last of McGuinness.
This is Balls Mahoney, the chair-swinging freak, and the show that you're watching is Wrestling Roundtable. When I want to know what's going on behind the scenes, I don't have a computer. I go to my friend's house, and I watch Wrestling Roundtable. So now, I can go to my friend's house and put it on LCD. I'm going to see me on a computer, on a TV. TV, computer, TV. I don't know, but I'm going to go watch it.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Join us on Twitter at Rest Roundtable, W-R-E-S-T, and Facebook.com/Wrestling Roundtable. We also have a fan page and a group page. Two things on Facebook, of course, YouTube, GFL.TV, that's Go Fight Live, Blog Talk Radio, and WrestlingRoundtable.com for the links to all of that. Joining the panel to my right, which is your left, in the chat room on WrestlingRoundtable.com every Monday night during Raw. He's been a fan of 22 years. He is Will Effin Brooks. Appropriate for ECW, and that's what we're going to talk about now. ECW, I think a lot of people, at least in our area, got turned on to it from 1997's Invasion, specifically the February Manhattan Center show. People like you who came from the Midwest later on would see it on cable on TNN. That was really right at the tail end of ECW, though. It really has its origins in 1989 in Philadelphia's Tri-State Wrestling run by Joel Goodhart. From there, it became Eastern Championship Wrestling when Todd Gordon took over, and it took kind of like a typical sort of indie prototype where they would bring in these names who were established on their way down, so to speak, like Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Don Morocco, Tito Santana, those sort of guys, and then try and mix them in with their new names, like Tommy Dreamer and Sandman and whatnot. However, I think the real jump here is, of course, when they double-crossed the NWA and left the National Wrestling Alliance, becoming Extreme Championship Wrestling, christened by Shane Douglas on that fateful night in Philadelphia, throwing down the title.
My ass.
And part of that was also switching bookers from Eddie Gilbert to Paul Heyman. Paul E. Dangerously, as we knew him from WCW at the time, and he took ECW in a completely different direction. As you mentioned, yeah, Terry Funk was a big part in that, but also was even these names like Sandman and Dreamer, who were already there doing lame gimmicks with suspenders or whatever, the fucking surfing and shit, they completely got redone. Also got redone is some of these names like Raven or Shane Douglas. I mean, they were young guys, but they had already been in WCW, in WWF, doing something completely different. That's where Bam Bam Bigelow went to resurrect his career after Lawrence Taylor. And then ECW really started getting momentum right here with their original acts, Sabu, Taz, Van Dam, Dudley's. As the years went by, they got a lot of big buzz. Of course, exposure from being essentially an unofficial WWF developmental, but also on the internet, tape trading. This is the real hardcore, die-hard, smart mark ECW fan audience. And as years went by, they grew from TV 1, 2 in the morning, MSG Network on Saturday night, to TV deals like TNN. But of course, by that point in pay-per-view and whatnot, there wasn't enough money coming in. They might have been a little too big for their britches. By the time they got to TNN, it was about a year and a half later that they went bankrupt. The first sign that ECW was over to me was the moment Paul Heyman showed up on Raw. I was like, it's done. Yeah. There had already been rumors. I was at the last pay-per-view at the Hammerstein Ballroom. There was one planned that they never got to, which probably would have been Van Dam and Rhino for the title. Waited too long. We never got to see that. And then, of course, they got integrated into the Alliance angle with the Invasion. Came the Alliance because they didn't have the fucking rights to ECW's name yet. They didn't care. They ended up buying it about a year later or so. And then they put out the Rise and Fall of ECW DVD, and that sold a shitload of copies to the point where they started doing tribute shows, One Night Stand and whatnot. They even used the ECW name for the SyFy show, and then eventually they killed that idea too, because it really wasn't ECW that we remembered. Despite that, we're still seeing hardcore reunions and all that sort of ECW tribute type shit. So why do you think fans still yearn for ECW?
How it really started and grew was, I think they had the perfect location. Because Philadelphia had hardcore fans, whether they're booing Kobe Bryant or yelling, fire Andy Reid or anything. They're just really passionate fans.
Booing Santa.
Exactly.
Cheering Michael Irvin with the
They really capitalized on the perfect spot because then you had people from New Jersey and people from New York come down. Compared to what else was going on, if we weren't into Vader, Sting, and Flair, and WWF was in this transition period between the Hulk Hogan era and getting to the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels era.
If you don't like clowns and dentists, look at us, we're extreme.
And here's ECW coming in the perfect era when like Nirvana and Wu-Tang and Biggie Smalls are coming out, and it's pretty much like R-rated wrestling that you never got to see.
It's a subculture.
It was a subculture, and it really took off. I remember the first time seeing it, great matches. The matches itself, the in-ring product, made you kind of ignore, I guess, the low quality, the TV production. But what's good is that they didn't ignore it. They said, this is what we are. We're low budget. We're in-your-face wrestling. Like us or hate us.
They worked around it.
And I think that's something that you don't see today. People still remember the good feeling they had after seeing an ECW event.
Do you think ECW holds up, though? Because to me, it kind of exists in a particular point in time. Like Rodney was kind of intimating, it came around at the perfect time when wrestling wasn't that good. This is the post-steroid scandal for WWF. WCW was never really that mainstream anyway, at least to the following that people knew outside of the South. And this came around right at the beginning, pretty much, of the Monday Night War. I mean, they were doing stuff that was getting buzzed, like I said, on the internet, but I think it ended up being ECW was really the first victim of the Monday Night War because of all the talent raids and the influence attitude era. I mean, you can do all the table spots and chairs and shit that you want first, and of course they don't have the limitations necessarily WWF did, but then when WWF does it on a bigger scale with the tables and Hell in a Cells and stuff, you're going to obviously lose some face to that. But it still has its following. So do you think that ECW holds up? Because a lot of it, watching it back, I don't really know.
It does and it doesn't. It was a sign of the times, but at the same time, it was great because it was when wrestling was really good.
Mm-hmm.
I look back on it as like my childhood. That's when I was growing up. That's when I was hitting puberty. You're an angry teenager. I was watching this stuff. And it made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if it came out now, it wouldn't work as well for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like CZW, which is hardcore for the sake of hardcore shit. Great storylines, something you can follow. You invest in the characters a lot easier. It was a lot more fun to watch.
And I think when you were watching it too, you didn't think of ECW as copying somebody. Now you
Not
go to
at
an
all.
indie show, you see table spots, you see all these shoot promos, you're thinking they're trying to do what ECW did. It's a watered down, Diet Coke version of ECW.
Right.
They're original.
Back then, it was
That's
something
why.
very original, something very new. For the arenas that they did, it translated well. It wouldn't translate well to a huge MSG audience of like 20,000 people.
Right.
Being in that small, no air-conditioned atmosphere is what really drove the energy.
Well, what we said on the hardcore topic when we talked about hardcore wrestling, it's certainly not like ECW was the first promotion to do hardcore stuff. Hell, we just talked about Jerry Lawler in Memphis. In ICW with the Papos, Savage was like the first person to pile drive people through the table and shit. So obviously they were inspired by a lot of what FMW was doing in Japan and Onita. So they took a lot of different influences, but the way they mixed it together was just something completely different and unique. And everyone,
It's a hybrid of styles.
right, and everyone knows Paul Heyman's emphasis on hide the negatives and emphasize the positives. And you were kind of hinting at it, that there was more to ECW than just necessarily hardcore, which is a point everybody makes. Of course, we know the Malenko Guerrero Classics and some great tag team matches and whatever, but that's not on the cover. The logo is barbed wire and blood. That's what it was about, really. So it really, I think, speaks about the time. Like I said, wrestling itself, like you were saying, a lot of people our age were watching wrestling overall, not just WWF and WCW, ECW as well. ECW was part of that, and I think, like I said, they were a victim of the Monday Night Wars because wrestling being so hot in and of itself, when the fuck else would WWF and WCW sign these sort of guys like Blue Meanie and Sandman and these sort of guys get spots like that? But you saw ECW at the tail end,
Yes.
when a lot of people like us had seen a lot of the talent raids and a lot of the guys that we liked were moving on. As most of them probably should because they had done as much as they could.
Maybe with the exception of RVD, they didn't really go to the full potential that ECW fans hoped they would if they went to the big leagues.
Dudley's did.
Of course, but I'm just saying that
Dudley's, yeah.
by the time people like you had seen it on the TNN deal, ECW was not kind of what it was the other year to me, but you have a different impression.
I have an opinion.
You have an opinion? Amazing.
It's different. It was. I know, right? It was fresh for me. I haven't seen Van Damme until he was in WWF in '97. Saw Taz on TV at one period of time, so I got to see them on television for a brief period of time before Taz left. Dudley's leaving. It was still fresh. I liked the atmosphere of watching a wrestling show in a small, intimate area. More rabid fans. Like they're into everything, and they weren't into wrestling. That was what I liked about it most. And I had no problem with seeing something different people. I liked watching new wrestling, most importantly. And when I had a chance to do it, it was very cool for me.
I still don't believe, as they try and emphasize on the DVD, that they were ever number 2, despite what they say. And yeah, they were doing maybe...
And some people's opinions,
Yeah,
but not
maybe,
business-wise.
but I mean, they were doing good buy rates on pay-per-view, maybe, and maybe outdrawing some WCW house shows and whatever, but still, in terms of a national scale, I don't think they were, or it would have worked. That being said, when we saw ECW maybe for the first time, after the first couple years of it getting a following, was like on that Raw Invasion or whatever, it really kick-started, this is another role they had in the Monday Night War sort of time, kick-started WWF and WCW wrestling itself to take it to the next fucking level, at least as appropriate at the time, because when Dreamer and Devon were having that match, when Taz was suplexing Mikey Whipwreck on his head, they made WWF look so fucking lame, and then a year later, look at what WWF turned into. So being one of the few people here who actually went to ECW shows like we did, what was it like being at an ECW show? Because that was a big thing. There were people who maybe weren't of the age to be allowed to go because it was one of those things that you probably heard it all the time too. Like people say, well, that's the real stuff, right?
You still hear that.
Yeah, because frying pans and vacuums really say real to me.
Yeah, I don't feel bad, but I think the people who've never been to an ECW show really missed out on an incredible experience. Because not only do you get these great entrance scenes that everyone knows, like I mentioned on one of the shows, I think it was Living Dangerously '99, New Jack when he gets Mustafa, and they played Wu-Tang Cream, and everybody at Park is chanting Wu-Tang, Wu-Tang before Mustafa came out. Like, you would never see that on Raw, Nitro, Thunder, Impact, none of that. You have a lot of smart fans that appreciate wrestling, and they made the in-house show really worth it. Worth your money, worth your time. The wrestling translated well with the small crowd. And you felt like you were almost at home because it's a small niche of people that really knew ECW, so every fan was like your friend.
I know
The Sandman's entrance at the ECW arena is
Oh my god, yeah.
I know
Sandman and Al Snow.
It made you feel like you were part of a movement, part of a bigger thing than just a wrestling show in a way. And that aspect of it, they worked this, it worked really well. Now, when they resurrected ECW for SyFy Channel and other sort of one-night stand pay-per-views as preceded it, do you think that was something they could have gone farther with, or was it just WWF squashing something that wasn't theirs anyway?
One Night Stand. The first one was great, cool. They did it in the Manhattan Center. It was like, oh man, like
Yes, it really brought you back.
It did.
You know what? I'll let you
watch
finish
that.
in a second,
yeah.
but those shows in particular, keep in mind, those were WWF produced shows. So when they're doing fucking ECW type shit with Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka, which was great, but it felt so authentic, it showed you what they could really do when they hand the reins over to someone in charge of production, in charge of the show, and made it feel completely unlike a WWE show, that you were saying?
the first One Night Stand was great. The second one was pretty good. I liked it. It was kind of more
It was
integrated.
a different concept.
It was WWE versus ECW.
Yeah.
Which is okay. It had some good matches. I liked Sabu and Rey Mysterio. That was a lot of fun. Mixed six-man tag match when how they won was Edge, Spirit, Beulah, and then for the pin, Pumpster. I'm thinking, oh, you scumbag, you son of a bitch. But when it came back to its own brand, though, it was so lame.
There were moments.
You're right.
Yeah, I don't know if it
I
And
really.
as soon as they got out of the Manhattan Center and everything, and just knowing that it was WWE produced show and like a SyFy network, and they're bringing in all these ridiculous gimmicks and
Zombie.
characters.
See, that was so bad it was good.
That was there were
reverse
some matches that helped.
But just
make
like
up for it.
Batista vs. Big Show.
Okay, fine, but there were
Change the
actually
channel.
things about ECW on SyFy I did like, because it really did feel different.
They shot it differently.
Like a
too.
different brand than Raw and SmackDown. Sabu was having this great career resurgence at the time. Kurt Angle was on his fucking game and having classics with anybody at the turn of a hat. And even
Ric Flair was
Flair
freaking
was
bumping the
doing-
thumbtacks.
right, I mean,
Like, what?
they were even doing Van Damme and Bob Holly and making me liking it. I know there was goofy shit, like the zombie, which is one of the best promos ever. But even so, there were still aspects of it I liked.
Debuting?
Right, but by the time they started doing shit like Lashley is the face of the company, that's when you knew.
Well, McMahon being the ECW champion.
That was great.
Yeah, that was great. That was lovely. No, I like that.
RIP right there.
That's
McMahon in a do-rag should be a poster of every WrestleMania.
That is. It's a role reverse. I used to dress up like Vince McMahon. Now he was dressing up like me. But before we wrap up and come back for our favorite matches, moments, and overall shows, looking back on the whole scope of ECW's existence from Tri-State Wrestling Alliance to fake ECW on SyFy, WWECW, what do you think ECW's legacy is when people look back on it now?
It was the last great territory. Like I said, it was niche, but it totally made sense, and it was different than everything else. They didn't treat the fans like idiots, like you were saying. Sabu got injured, broke his neck. They showed it. They didn't like cut away, like, oh shit, you know, no. No, they showed it, even like diagrammed it, like, oh, see it right here where the neck snaps?
Or
Yeah,
even
so.
when he had a contract issue, he just
Exactly.
came out and said, I fired Sabu today because he went to Japan, or whatever the fuck it was.
Yeah, but I'm saying that they didn't treat us like idiots. It was completely different than WWE or WCW at the time. It was great.
Investment organization of innovation and just pure passion for wrestling. The wrestlers, you can tell that they really loved being in there, and they really had fun.
The freedom.
The freedom. And I remember going to a Belmore show at ECW, and all the wrestlers are hanging out with everybody after that, and you can just go up to Spike Dudley, you can go up to Rob Van Dam, and have conversation with them. They're easily accessible. One of the last organizations that treated their fans like family.
Rapid excitement. So every time you watch an ECW show, whether it was on DVD, TV, whatever it was, pay-per-view, crowd just ate up the energy, and that's what you want at a show. You don't want to go to a show and be sitting on your hands the whole entire time and getting bored. No matter what, they make sure they pack the entire crowd from the top to the bottom with something for you to want to watch. Good wrestling, hardcore, high-flying, hard-hitting, it didn't matter what it was. The angles were emotional too. They got you into it and you cared.
I was an ECW fan. I don't think a lot of it holds up. I think, like I was saying before, it's of its time, and that's okay. But I don't necessarily feel as passionately packing the Armory in Pennsylvania, 1,200 people for a Shane Douglas produced type show. I don't necessarily want to take part in that. But I do like looking back on certain aspects of ECW, and one thing you could tell about the success of the marketing and the promotion of ECW, because the whole point of wrestling is to work you. Like, remember how disappointed we were with Taz's essentially mainstream run in like WWF or whatever, and now he's just, hey Cole, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? This is the guy putting over Hulkamania now, and I thought this guy
With
fucking
the
kill
towel
Hulk
half
Hogan
over
and
his face.
would kill Hulk Hogan. You totally bought into that, so you worked us. But one thing you could tell about how the wrestlers and the staff felt about ECW too is, especially with the fans, they consider people like Austin or Pillman or guys like that who were really there for a cup of coffee and had just one great promo as ECW guys. That one maybe moment that they had stands the test of time because it felt real, it felt authentic, and it made an impression. So even though it was briefly short-lived, smart marks, or that's not for you, baby, that still has stood the test of time. So even though they were there briefly, even just being there briefly, you're ECW.
Because ECW gave them a platform to vent out any hard feelings that they had, and they couldn't do that in any other two organizations.
Well, we're going to talk about some more ECW when we come back. Wrestling Roundtable is coming back with some more. I'm repetitive. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Quick 15.
Yeah. All right.
What's ECW real, Rodney?
You got asked that all the time, didn't you? That's not real
At the
stuff.
time, though,
That
it was
was
like
real.
people were like that was a legit thing. People
couldn't believe people were getting hit by that shit, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And the moves that they did too.
That was cafeteria talk.
You know, the first time I saw. Well, like I remember, like on
How
the
much?
internet, like
18.
Oh, then we're
hear about this ECW review. I'm like, who's this Taz guy? And then like one night on like Channel 2 or something like that, they did like one of those entertainment shows. They did a segment about ECW, and I interviewed Douglas. I'm like, huh. So finally, like I caught it one night at 2 in the morning. It was the night that Douglas took the title, TV title from Jericho in the 4-way, and like Beulah got like, you know, power bombed off the top rope of the table. I'm like, holy fucking shit! I'm like, I can't imagine Sonya Sable like having this done to them.
One of the first shows I watched was Blue Meanie in the opener doing a moonsault, and I was like, Jesus, that fat fuck.
Right? I'm like, hot damn.
Okay.
Just say Blue Meanie.
Yeah. We ready to go? And then Pulp Fiction promo. Those were great.
All the Pulp. Yes.
Yeah.
I remember the one the gangsters did. Like they actually like found some like shitty looking street in South Philly and then filmed the gangsters just cutting the promo.
Okay.
This is the new effing show, Jerry Lynn, and you're watching the Wrestling Roundtable. Giddy up.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Rejoining the panel to my left, which is your right, Bill Markigan. To my right, which is your left, is Orlando O'Neill, and we were talking about Extreme Championship Wrestling. We want to move on to some of our favorite matches, moments, and overall shows, as we usually do. So what were some of your favorite matches?
I'm sure I've mentioned Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn over the past few shows, but Rob Van Dam had a very great match with Al Snow leading up to Living Dangerously in '98. Very back and forth, incredible chemistry with each other. Al Snow went over, that's when I started dropping the hints with Sabu and RVD going their feud. But yeah, that's one match that not a lot of people know about. That's great.
November to remember, 1995, Raven and Cactus Jack against Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk. And this is during Raven and Tommy Dreamer's big feud. And Cactus Jack is wearing the Dungeon of Doom t-shirt, which you know gets him over in ECW. They just went all out, blood, a million different weapons. Tommy Dreamer, a fan gave him a VCR and he hit Cactus over the head with it. It was just all over the place.
Speaking of Raven tag matches, one of the most infamous matches in ECW history was Raven and Stevie Richards defending the tag belts against the Pitbulls. That was a big feud, and it was a double dog collar chain match. And it also featured the culmination of the 911 choke slamming everybody angle where he finally got his hands on Bill Alfonso. So multiple angles came to a head, and a tag title change, big moment in ECW.
You mentioned Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn. I love that match. It's actually my favorite ECW match of all time. Taz and Sabu. One that really hooked me on it, Dudley's against Spike Dudley and Balls Mahoney. It went everywhere in the arena. They were teasing their way out because Bubba would look at the camera. One of those angles that made me think, whoa, there's something going on here. Because Bubba was looking, saying, Vince, I can't wait to be in the WWF. He was actually saying things about leaving ECW.
It was like September '99.
Exactly. And they fought up in the concession stand. They set tables on fire. It was your classic ECW match. But the fact that it wasn't with the same old main eventers and you had these guys mid-card tearing it up.
That was a big match.
It really showed what ECW was all about.
There was a point in about August '99 where it seemed like the Dudleys were powerbombing Balls Mahoney through a flaming table every week.
I saw that live at one of the Bar shows. I was front row, and you could feel the heat of the fire, and I'm like, I can't even imagine what it's like in the ring.
Taz, when he finally won the title from Shane Douglas, guilty as charged in January '99. I know a lot of people were down on Shane Douglas because he had a broken arm, he wasn't wrestling very much, and the Taz and Sabu match at Barely Legal didn't live up to the hype after a year and all that shit. But I thought Taz and Shane Douglas was really good, especially considering the limitations of Shane Douglas. And
I like the second one better.
Okay, well, Sabu also came back in the middle of the match too with the lights going out and the pyro and the silhouette.
Yeah, that's what Triple Threat turned on Douglas.
Yeah, that was awesome, that whole thing. But also, speaking of Rob Van Dam, when he won his television title that he held for about 2 years almost,
23 months
against Bam Bam Bigelow on what would end up being called Hardcore TV.
Yeah,
that was one of those matches where you see Bigelow in, like I said, the midst of resurrecting his career. And this is, of course, where he's a lot bigger than a lot of the guys. So he's having great matches with a lot of smaller people too, throwing around Spike Dudley and shit. But Van Dam was doing fucking planches into the crowd. So
First time you really saw stuff.
Right, you couldn't even see where he landed. He just dive bombed into this crowd of people. So there were a lot of great matches.
Summer '98. Masato Tanaka and Balls Mahoney on Hardcore TV. It was right around July 4th. I mean, it wasn't a great match technical-wise, but the crowd reaction for them hitting each other with the chairs and still getting up, and it just shows that these guys just had courage and really was a great example of the passion that ECW had for the wrestlers themselves and how much they respected them. And that's one thing that really made a difference. In WWF and WCW, you didn't have a lot of standing ovations for changes of moves and holds and guys getting up from chair shots. That match really stood out for me.
To go along with Masato Tanaka and Mike Awesome,
right.
November to remember 1999. Mike Awesome just won the ECW title. He's defending the title. These guys went all out. The top rope powerbomb off the apron, just wicked chair shots back and forth, and we covered that chair shot epidemic last episode. But back then, when you see these guys going all out, nobody's putting their hands up, chair shots, you're like, holy shit, this is awesome.
How come all these Japanese guys don't get broken necks and concussions? Well, aside from Sawa. But you think, like, we talked about Mike Awesome in the context of the concussions, like Benoit and whatever. I wonder why Masato Tanaka hasn't hung himself.
Yeah, he's still going strong in Japan, too.
But speaking of Masato Tanaka, Mike Awesome, that was one of those series that I felt like Paul Heyman, and one of his faults as a booker was he would do things too much of a good thing. Like, I think he was always trying to capture the lightning in a bottle he got with the Guerrero Malenko Classic. And he was always trying to do those matches like Tajiri, Super Crazy, Mike Awesome, Masato Tanaka. As good as they were, it just got to the point where there were so many of them, you couldn't even tell them apart practically. Yeah. And that, I think, also showed itself with the SmackDown 6 in 2002. It's too much of a good thing to a degree, but when they came back to it at One Night Stand 2005,
yes. Phenomenal match.
I thought that was their best one.
It was like getting right back in a bite for that. That's great.
Right. And one more hardcore one was Beulah and Bill Alfonso, As Good As It Gets, 1997, because that match was so much better than it had any right to be, with two non-wrestlers and all that blood.
It spoke volumes for ECW as a company, because you took two managers and put them in the ring. I mean, when can you ever remember two managers getting in the ring, or people who weren't superstars and actually really captivating an audience?
Yeah, usually be like Heyman and Cornette having a tuxedo match.
Forget just take away what they did in the ring, take away the pint of blood, I believe Alfonso lost, something like that. It was like a record, I think. The fact that the audience was as into it as they were, with all you had going in ECW, even with the other two companies at the time, the fact that they took an audience like that and got them invested into the match, two managers, I mean, it says a lot. It's not like they're coming off of being ex-pros or anything like that.
Right.
They were just two managers who had wrestlers who hated each other, so naturally they did, of course. What they were able to do and get the audience drawn in, it almost represented ECW the way the whole company was.
Off camera, one of the moments that we just talked about was when Raven returned to ECW in September '99, just when they're getting on TNN. This was the first real show that they had on TNN. The first one was taped, ended up being a clip job, but the first one taped at the Elks Lodge in New York in Queens was Raven coming back because he had just been released from WCW. Perfect timing for them. Dudley's were doing an angle leaving with the belts, and then Dreamer didn't have a partner. Raven showed up, and he wins the belts with Tommy Dreamer with their history. I thought that was a great moment, and maybe it's later on, there were some maybe earlier on. What are some of your favorite ECW moments?
The formation of the new Triple Threat, which was the starting of the fall for ECW, because then they were off TV up until like right before that November to Remember. But you had RVD and Sabu that were just getting back together after their hardcore 99 match, and then Taz, they're all feuding with Triple Threat, and at the end, they all do their poses in the middle of the ring. I went fucking apeshit.
I love the Candido, Bigelow, Douglas triple threat. That to me was like the standard triple threat.
They just like wrote the book of being a great faction.
But speaking of Shane Douglas, and I think I went into detail about this on one of our radio shows about great promos in history, like Hogan's at Bash at the Beach 96. When you have a moment like you're about to double cross the fucking NWA and christen ECW, of course in your hometown and everything, but to me that was one of those promos that Shane Douglas did. This is for you, Dad, and all these names can kiss my ass. This had to hit every note that it needed to, because if this promo bombed, that was the beginning of ECW as we knew it right then and there. And he hit every note perfectly. But another one is November to Remember. Sandman got blinded by fire, and Tommy Dreamer felt bad and all this other stuff. So eventually they built it up, and Sandman was 24/7 about this. And then that all leads to November to Remember 94 and the swerve, and he canes Dreamer so fucking hard in the back of the head. Oh my God, that was a great swerve.
Right as soon as the invasion was starting, and it was Jericho and Kane against Awesome Storm.
July 2001.
Yes, July 2001, and RVD and Dreamer jump in the ring, and they're jumping on them, and then the WWF guys come in. Raven, Taz, and the Dudleys.
Incredible.
Oh man, and Heyman's with Jim Ross, and he's telling them, You wanna know what this is about? You wanna know what this is about? He goes in the ring, and this invasion just got extreme.
What's great about that moment, and forget, of course, the alliance that formed later on, just in and of itself, all those guys that ran out for the WWF, and of course, some people noticed that it's all former ECW guys. I didn't, because I was just so fucking caught up in Dreamer and Van Dam being there. But then once they turned around and everyone realized, shit just got real. What's great about that moment is all those guys were pretty much doing nothing. They were jokes in the mid-card in WWF, but as soon as they turned around, they became instant main eventers. They instantly meant something. They flushed it all away, but at least for that moment, it just really
later that show, they flushed it away. It didn't take them long.
Stephanie is extreme! She was extremely hot, but that's not what I think about when I think of ECW.
Taz's last match for them. The triple threat was awesome.
That actually wasn't his last match, though, because he had a match with Van Dam later on. But that's when it came out that he had signed.
Right.
So it was kind of like goodbye anyway.
And after all you've done with Taz and making him this human wrecking machine, he got pinned within the first few minutes of that match. I like the fact that even though a lot of fans were on the fence about it, he was getting, I remember, boos that night and whatnot. But a lot of people ended up just stopping, and then they kind of put all that to the side and then gave him that ovation. The wrestlers came out. This was all mid-match, which I ever recall ever seeing. The match was going on, all the wrestlers came out, the fans turned around and started to give him that standing ovation and whatnot. And
they broke kayfabe.
Right, exactly. And which says a lot about the ECW fans once again. And then of course Tanaka and Awesome went on to have a great match, which Awesome won.
I like how they wrote off Beulah McGillicuddy in 1998 with the Dudleys breaking her neck with the 3D, puts over the finish, puts heat on the feud. One more before we move on to overall shows, because it made all the highlights in the opening and whatnot, is Taz and Bigelow going through the ring,
of course,
Living Dangerously 98. That is such a great visual, and it's also putting over Taz even though he lost, because they're building up this human suplex machine and he's unbeatable and such great marketing and whatnot, but they built up this great Taz Bigelow match. How does Taz lose? Going through the fucking ring. And we didn't even get to see the impact. You put that together in your own mind. It looked great. He drags the body out, pins him, and Bigelow wins the belt. The rematch was good too. But let's move on to some of our favorite overall shows. If we want to recommend to some people out there, what's an ECW show to check out? What would that be?
Living Dangerously 99, you had Sabu and Taz, you had RVD, Jerry Lynn, great show. And
Crazy
maybe,
Jerry.
Yes, exactly. Just being there live also was what cemented it for me too.
Anarchy Rules 99. They actually came out with this on a VHS from Pioneer in the early 2000s or whatnot. And I remember picking up this tape and I popped it in from the first match to the main event. Oh, it was completely awesome. The first match is Lance Storm and Jerry Lynn, and I thought that's one of the best opening matches since Bret Hart and Owen Hart. They had Crazy Tajiri and Guido in a three-way. They had Awesome, Tanaka, and Taz. And the main event, which I thought was awesome, was RVD and Balls Mahoney. I wasn't expecting much, but they put on a great match, and it showed that Balls Mahoney could do more than just be a guy that hits people over the head with chairs.
One Night Stand in 2005, even though it's a WWE more so pay-per-view. Because really when I came on to ECW was when they were kind of on their way out. So One Night Stand being one to actually see while it was happening. Years later after ECW was done, that they came back and still put on an incredible show. And they've been going, I think at that point, for now 5 years. They brought everything back after we've seen the WWE style for years, and the fact that they bring back the flaming tables, the barbed wire and that stuff, but they brought back just traditional awesome wrestling matches that I don't remember really seeing much of the time, because that's when we started to get John Cena shoved down our throat. So we got to see Jericho and Lance Storm. We had that great triple threat. Tajiri, Crazy, and Guido were in it. The location, the crowd.
I actually prefer 2006 between the two one-night stand shows. I think overall it's a better card. I like the Ray Sabu title match, even though people don't like the non-finish. Of course, everyone remembers Van Dam and Cena in that match. And I also like the mid-card stuff. Angle and Orton had an awesome match. Yeah, Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer, of course, adding Beulah at the last second against Edge and Lita and Mick Foley. So I thought overall that was a really good show. But I also think back to their first pay-per-view, Barely Legal, because that, I think, hit all the notes it really needed to. It wasn't perfect. Of course, we didn't really get Dreamer Raven sort of blow off, and that had been something they've been building up for a while. That was really transferred over to Terry Funk, and that three-way with Stevie Richards, Sandman, and Terry Funk was really good. 50-year-old whatever man doing moonsaults off a fucking ladder. The Michinoku Pro match is legendary. And I even like Sabu and Taz. I know a lot of people were disappointed at the time, but that I think overall was a good match, a good show, and really set the stage for what ECW was about. And
it was the start of the Van Dam Sabu era.
Right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this time on Wrestling Roundtable. We will be back. Yes, we're not quite done just yet. It is winding down, but we will be back for a couple more tapings. And next time, we're going to talk about lots of things, including PEDs and MMA and the internet wrestling community. That's you, I guess, the IWC. So for the panel of Rodney LeCompte, Will Effin Brooks, Alex Payne, Orlando O'Neill, Bill Markey, I'm Eric Santamaria. Thank you and join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com for more.